around 20,000 years ago. The place where you are sitting right now was likely a zone of absolute struggle for survival. Something biological happened in this world that still fascinates us today and still sends a chill down our spines. Nature, usually so careful with efficiency and restraint, suddenly chose excess instead. This was the age of the megafauna, the high point of the Ice Age. It is a term that sounds clinical, but at its heart, it describes a time when life decided to shatter every scale we know. South America was home to ground sloths that did not hang lazily from trees, because no tree could have held them. They weighed as much as a modern elephant, and standing on their hind legs, they could have looked straight into the upper floor of a modern house. And here in the heart of Europe, in the valleys we now call home, colossal creatures roamed whose very existence seemed to defy the laws of physics. Why did evolution do this? Why did nature pour so much energy into bone, muscle, and sheer mass, especially in a time when resources seemed so scarce? This question leads us to one of the most fascinating paradoxes in the history of our planet. We tend to associate cold with stillness, with scarcity and decline. But the Ice Age was no dead planet. It was a high-performance engine of biology. Anyone walking today through certain valleys in Germany or hiking the limestone plateaus of the Swabian Alps is walking across a graveyard of giants. It is easy to see these places simply as scenic trails, but the layers of rock beneath our feet tell a story of brutal selection. The cold was never just a passive backdrop. It was an active sculptor. It shaped life with hammer and chisel. Every animal that was too small, too poorly insulated, or whose metabolism was not efficient enough, was ruthlessly weeded out. What remained were the giants. The air back then tasted different. It was drier, dustier. Oxygen levels were similar to today. But the atmospheric conditions carried sound in a completely different way. Noise traveled further across the treeless plains. The trumpeting of a mammoth could be heard for kilometers, a lone call across an endless expanse. If we want to understand this world, we have to let go of the image of wilderness we carry today. Our forests now are dense, green, and tangled. But the world of the megafauna was a stage built for visibility. There was almost nowhere to hide. To survive here, you had to be either extremely fast or so massive and well-armed that attacking you would have been suicide. Size, then, was first and foremost a kind of insurance policy. A massive body cools down far more slowly. It is a simple principle of thermodynamics, one that anyone who has ever tried to keep a full bathtub warm compared to a cup of tea already understands. The cup goes cold within minutes. The tub holds its heat for an hour or more. For an animal in the Ice Age, warmth meant survival. Whoever carried mass carried their own furnace with them wherever they went. But that mass came at a price. A gigantic body is a hungry machine, and it demands fuel constantly. A woolly mammoth needed to eat up to 180 kilograms of plant matter every single day, an amount almost impossible to picture. It is roughly the equivalent of 3 or 4 overflowing supermarket trolleys, consumed daily, and this in a landscape that, at first glance, looked sparse and barren. Here we run into a common misconception about the Ice Age. We often picture nothing but endless glaciers. But most of Europe, particularly the regions south of the great Scandinavian ice sheets, what is today central and southern Germany, France, and Austria, was by no means permanently buried under ice. It was a landscape unlike anything we have an equivalent for today. Scientists call it the Mammoth Steppe. It was the largest continuous biome the Earth has ever seen, an immense grassland stretching from Spain across Siberia all the way to Alaska. And this grassland was the engine behind the megafauna. It was extraordinarily nutrient-rich, full of herbs and grasses fertilized by the mineral-rich dust carried from the glaciers. This vast natural buffet was the reason these animals could grow so large. Food was abundant, provided you were strong enough to reach it and digest it. But it was a deceptive paradise. The winters were long and dark, months in which the sun had barely any strength and temperatures dropped to levels that would shatter modern thermometers. 40, even 50 degrees below zero were not unusual. In nights like these, the fate of entire species was decided. The megafauna was life's answer to this extreme challenge. It was an attempt to become unbeatable. It is a strange thought that exactly where your favorite coffee shop might stand today, or where you drive to work each morning, herds of animals once stood that seem almost mythical to us now. In gravel pits across Europe, the bones of animals we now associate only with Africa have been found, although in far larger, cold-adapted forms. Hippos once lived in the Thames, lions roamed Bavaria, hyenas prowled the forests of Westphalia. It was a global shift in the balance of power. The small hid, the large ruled. This fascination with the gigantic runs deep within us, perhaps because our own ancestors, small and vulnerable groups of early humans, lived in exactly this world. They did not see these giants in a museum or on a screen. They saw them face to face, felt the ground tremble beneath their feet, smelled the heavy musk that rose from their shaggy coats. We still carry that ancient awe in our genes. When we stand before the skeleton of a mammoth or a cave bear today, we feel that same old respect stir within us. Had we stood there ourselves, in that era, with nothing but a spear in hand and the breath of the beast on our face, would we have found the courage of the hunters within us? Or would raw, naked fear have stopped our hearts entirely? Size alone was never enough to survive. You needed a stage to perform on, and this stage was stranger than anything we know today. The Mammoth Steppe was no peaceful pasture. It was a place full of danger, a ground that stored stories of death and rebirth in equal measure. But what made this habitat so unique, and at the same time so deadly? Why could a place this dry and cold support more large animal biomass than our modern rainforests do today? The answer lies in the soil itself, in the roots of an ecosystem so productive that it reshaped the world, and one that has almost entirely vanished from the surface of the Earth. If you stand today on a northern coastline, perhaps looking out across the grey waves of the North Sea, you see water stretching to the horizon. Now close your eyes for a moment and erase that water from the picture. In its place stretches endless land, an ocean not of water, but of dry, swaying grass rustling in the icy wind. We find ourselves in a time when Britain was not an island at all, but the outpost of a vast continent. A journey from where London stands today, all the way to Berlin, would have been possible without ever crossing open sea. This sunken land, which geologists today call Doggerland, was part of perhaps the most astonishing, and at the same time most dangerous, habitat our planet has ever produced. The mammoth steppe. It is a term that almost sounds cozy, evoking wide meadows and peacefully grazing animals. But do not be fooled. The mammoth steppe was a hell built of ice, dust, and merciless clarity. There is no place on Earth today that truly resembles this ecosystem. When we think of cold regions, we picture the tundra of modern Siberia or Canada, damp, swampy, covered in moss and lichen, acidic and difficult to digest. But the world of the Ice Age was different. It was dry, extremely dry. With so much water locked away in the towering glaciers to the north, very little precipitation fell. The sky was often cloudless, a steel blue dome by day, and a window into the endless blackness of the cosmos by night. This dryness was the key. It prevented deep bogs from forming during the short summers, and it meant that snow rarely piled up to great depths in winter. For the animals, this was the decisive advantage. Food remained within reach, but what kind of food was this? Here lies the true wonder of this habitat. Through the immense mechanical force of the glaciers, which ground solid rock into the finest dust, the soil was continuously enriched with minerals. The wind carried this dust, which in Germany today forms what we call loess, the foundation of some of our richest farmland, across thousands of kilometers. This dust was pure gold for plant life. It created soil so nutrient-dense that it produced not a barren tundra, but a high-performance steppe overflowing with herbs, grasses, wormwood, and wildflowers. Picture yourself standing in the middle of this landscape, somewhere along a river valley in what is now southern Germany. It is summer, but forget the oppressive heat we know today. The sun hangs high and burns intensely, because the air is thin and clear, yet the wind, which never sleeps, always carries the chill of the nearby ice within it. The air smells of sage, of dry grass, and the mineral scent of dusty earth. All around you, flowers bloom in purple, yellow, and white. It feels almost paradisiacal until you look more closely at the ground beneath your feet. It is hard as concrete. Just a few centimeters down begins the permafrost. Soil that has remained frozen for thousands of years, solid and impenetrable. It was exactly this ground that made the mammoth steppe such a deadly trap. In summer, when the topmost layer thawed, the solid ground beneath could turn to treacherous mud that acted like quicksand. One wrong step, one moment of sinking, and a ton-heavy animal was trapped. Predators knew this well, but even more dangerous than the ground was the cold itself. When the short, explosive summer ended, often within a matter of days, the world plunged into a winter that resembled a coma more than a sea season. Temperatures fell to bottomless depths, but it was not the cold alone that killed. It was the wind. Without trees, without forests to break the gusts, storms swept across the open plains that could strip an animal of its body heat within seconds. There was no shelter. No cave was large enough to hold an entire herd of mammoths. They had to stand out there, exposed in the middle of the storm, and simply endure it. The mammoth steppe forgave no weakness. A broken leg, a festering wound, or simply a poor year of grass growth, and an animal's fate was sealed. Carcasses did not rot in this cold. They freeze-dried instead, turning into eerie statues scattered across the landscape, until scavengers or the next blizzard finally erased them. But why do we call this the most dangerous place of all? Because it was a system of extremes. The energy density of the vegetation was immense. The grasses were packed with sugars and proteins, far more than the grass we know today. This allowed herbivores to build enormous muscle mass, and where massive walls of meat moved across the land, massive predators evolved to hunt them. The openness of the landscape meant that everyone could see everyone else. There were no surprise attacks from dense undergrowth. Hunting here was not a matter of stealth, but often a matter of brutal endurance or raw strength played out on an open stage, an arena without walls. It is difficult for us to imagine how loud, and at the same time how silent, this place could be. When the wind fell still, the silence must have been absolute. No engines, no rustling leaves, because there were hardly any trees. Only the cracking of ice, the snorting of animals, and the endless whistle of wind through the grass. A sound that could drive a person to the edge of madness. Have you ever wondered how you would feel standing utterly alone in that vastness, without navigation, without modern clothing, with nothing but hides and a spear? Isolation may have been the greatest danger of all. This steppe functioned only through a perfect yet fragile balance. The animals themselves were its gardeners. By constantly disturbing the ground, mammoths and rhinoceroses prevented moss from taking over. They fertilized the soil with their waste and pressed grass seeds into the earth with their weight. It was a symbiosis on a colossal scale. The steppe fed the giants, and the giants sustained the steppe in return. A cycle that ran stably for tens of thousands of years, until the rhythm finally broke. In Germany today, traces of this lost world still surface. In gravel pits along the Upper Rhine, or in the caves of the Swabian Alps, workers and archaeologists still stumble upon the remains of this ecosystem. A molar here, a thigh bone there, darkened with age, heavy as stone. Hold one in your hand, and you feel the weight of millennia. These bones tell us that the mammoth steppe was no barren place, but a land of abundance, an abundance that constantly danced along the edge of collapse. The nights on the mammoth steppe must have held a beauty that would bring tears to our eyes today. Auroras, visible far further south than they appear now, danced across the sky, bathing the snow-covered plains in ghostly green and violet light. But beauty did not feed anyone. To not just survive in this frozen hell, but to dominate it, strength alone was not enough. You had to outsmart physics itself. Evolution faced a genuinely mathematical problem. How do you keep a body warm when the outside temperature sits 80 degrees below the body's own core heat? How do you stop blood from crystallizing into ice within the veins? The answer was not found in inventing new organs, but in geometry. There is a simple, almost ruthless rule in nature that determines who becomes king in the cold and who ends up a frozen lump. This rule explains why we never see elephants in Antarctica and why the rulers of the Ice Age grew to such titanic proportions. It is a physical law as unshakable as gravity itself, and to understand why a beaver suddenly grew as large as a modern bear, we need to look at this law more closely. It explains not just the past, but principles that still govern the animal kingdom today. In the Ice Age, however, this principle was pushed to its absolute limit. We now leave the wide, wind-battered grasslands behind and zoom into the biology of these giants, into the blueprint of survival itself. Size was never an accident. It was the only solution to a deadly problem. There is a paradox in physics that at first glance makes no sense at all. When we cool matter down, it normally contracts. Steel bridges shrink in winter. Air in a tire loses volume. Water, before it freezes into ice, takes up less space. Cold is the force of contraction, of shrinking, of stillness. And yet, as the Earth fell into the brutal grip of the Ice Age, life did the exact opposite. It did not shrink. It exploded outward in size and height, as though nature had decided to answer the cold with defiance, creating creatures larger than anything that had walked the warmer eras before. Why? Why is size the ultimate answer to cold? To solve this riddle, we do not need to look far. The answer was discovered in Germany, in the city of Göttingen, in the year 1847. A German anatomist and biologist named Carl Bergmann sat over his notes and noticed a pattern so consistent it almost felt like magic. He studied penguins, bears, deer, and he saw it clearly. The further north you travel, into the cold, the larger individuals of a related species tend to grow. The emperor penguin of Antarctica is a giant compared to its tiny cousin on the Galapagos Islands. The Siberian tiger dwarfs its relatives in the forests of Indonesia. Bergmann formulated a law that every biology student today knows as Bergmann's rule. But behind this dry scientific name lies a dramatic struggle for warmth, energy, and the avoidance of death itself. Imagine your body as a house. Inside this house is a furnace, your metabolism, which burns fuel and produces heat. And there are windows and walls through which this heat escapes, your skin. In the icy hell of the Mammoth Steppe, where the wind howled across the plains at 30 degrees below zero, warmth was the most precious currency of all. To lose heat was to lose your life. The goal of the game was simple: produce as much warmth as possible and lose as little as you can. And here enters the mathematics of giants, a principle of pure geometry. Think of a sugar cube and a shoebox. Both have a volume, their contents, and a surface, their outer shell. When you enlarge a small body, its volume grows far faster than its surface area. This is the key. A massive animal like the woolly mammoth is, in essence, a gigantic heat reservoir. Its internal volume, where the organs work, where the heart pumps and digestion generates heat, is enormous. Its surface, the skin through which cold can attack, is comparatively tiny. A mammoth is like a thermos flask, immense contents, very little outer wall. Compare that to a mouse. A mouse is almost nothing but surface. Its small body volume can barely store any heat, and through its relatively enormous skin area, it radiates that energy away almost instantly. Being a mouse during the Ice Age meant living life on the very edge. To avoid freezing to death, its metabolism had to race constantly. Its heart pounded like a machine gun, simply to compensate for the heat it kept losing. It had to eat and eat and eat again, endlessly. A giant, on the other hand, could afford to rest. Its massive body was sluggish in the best possible sense. Once warmed, it barely cooled at all. A mammoth standing through a frost-bitten night was an unshakable fortress against thermodynamics itself. While smaller animals shivered and fought for their lives, the giant simply stood there, protected by the mathematics of its own body. But evolution did not stop there. Size was the first step, but the fine-tuning that followed was equally brilliant. There was a second rule that worked hand in hand with Bergman's discovery, known as Allen's rule. Look at a modern African elephant. What stands out immediately? Its enormous ears, like sails, threaded with thousands of blood vessels. They function as cooling systems. In the heat of the savannah, the elephant pumps hot blood into its ears and fans them, releasing excess heat into the air. If a mammoth had carried ears like that through the Ice Age, it would have been a death sentence. Within minutes, the blood in those thin ears would have frozen, leading to frostbite, gangrene, and death. This is why the giants of the Ice Age looked so compact, almost squeezed together. The woolly mammoth had tiny ears, barely larger than a human's, hidden deep within its thick fur. Its tail was short, a small stump pressed tightly against its body. Anything that protruded from the body was a potential weak point, an open door for the frost to enter. Nature tended to round these animals off to make them as compact and spherical as possible, minimizing surface area. The woolly rhinoceros did not look elegant or graceful. It looked like an armored tank, built specifically to hoard warmth. Yet this strategy of survival through size carried a dangerous cost. A large body stores heat brilliantly, but it is also an expensive machine to maintain. The engine of a mammoth or a giant deer consumed unimaginable amounts of fuel. We spoke earlier about the productivity of the mammoth steppe, and here the circle closes. Only because this ecosystem delivered such an extraordinary amount of energy-rich grass could these animals afford the biological experiment of gigantism at all. It was a gamble. As long as the food supply held, the giants reigned, nearly unbeatable against both cold and predators. But woe to them if the buffet ever closed. Imagine you are a time traveler standing beside one of these animals. You would feel the heat radiating from its body. Even in bitter cold, the animal would glow like a furnace. If you reached, hypothetically, into the dense undercoat of a mammoth, you would feel no cold at all. The fur was a masterpiece of engineering. It consisted of 2 layers, an extremely dense, almost woolly undercoat that trapped air and insulated the skin directly, and long, shaggy guard hairs that could grow up to a meter in length, shedding rain, snow, and wind like roof tiles. A mammoth could stand through a blizzard, and the snow on its back would not even melt. The insulation was that effective. Body heat stayed in. The frost stayed out. This biological design shaped the behavior of these animals as well. Giants move differently. They experience time differently. A small animal lives fast and dies young. A giant moves with a deliberate, unstoppable calm. Its steps were heavy, its heart rate low. A mammoth's heart may have beaten only a few dozen times per minute, a slow, powerful rhythm pumping blood through a body weighing several tons. This calmness, this composure these animals must have radiated, was not a sign of laziness, but of efficiency. Every unnecessary movement wasted energy, and in the Ice Age, energy was equivalent to life itself. It is fascinating to see how physics shapes life. The same laws that determine how quickly your coffee cools on a winter morning decided 20,000 years ago that deer would grow antlers spanning 3 meters, and that bears would grow so large that, standing upright inside a cave, they could touch the ceiling. We humans take pride today in our technology, our heating systems, our insulated jackets. But the megafauna carried their technology within their own DNA. They were walking fortresses against thermodynamics itself. The next time you complain about the cold and wrap yourself in a heavy coat, think of Carl Bergman and his rule. Think of the fact that your body is fighting the very same ancient battle the mammoths once fought, except we cannot pack on tons of mass to win. We had to use our minds instead, to tame fire and wrap ourselves in hides, because biologically speaking, we were simply too small and too bare for this world. We were the exception in a world of giants. And yet we survived, while they vanished. From all these giants, from all these experiments of nature, there is one that stands above all others as the symbol of this entire era. It is the face of the Ice Age, the icon we picture instantly. The moment someone says the word prehistoric, it was not only enormous, it was the ruler of the steppe, a social, intelligent, and deeply moving creature whose story can bring us close to tears once we look at it in detail. We have come to understand the rules that created it. Now it is time to look the king itself in the eye. The woolly mammoth awaits. When we hear the word Ice Age, an image instantly forms in our minds. It is not a glacier, not a snowstorm, not even a Neanderthal. It is a silhouette, a curved back, massive curling tusks, and shaggy fur trailing in the wind. The woolly mammoth, Mammuthus primigenius, is far more than an extinct animal. It is the avatar of an entire epoch, the symbol of life's resilience against a hostile world. But the image we know from films and children's books barely scratches the surface. To truly understand why this creature was the undisputed king of the steppe, we need to come close enough to smell its heavy musk and feel the warmth radiating from its massive body. Picture yourself standing in what is today northern Germany, in an ancient river valley, but tens of thousands of years in the past. The fog lifts, and suddenly a shadow emerges from the grey. It is enormous. A full-grown bull reached a shoulder height of over 3 meters and weighed between 6 and 8 tons, as much as a modern bus, walking on 4 legs. But it is not just the sheer mass that overwhelms you. It is the absolute precision of its adaptation. A mammoth was, in essence, a biological marvel of engineering, built for a world that forgave no mistakes. Consider first its most obvious feature, the fur. It was not simply hair, it was a highly complex survival suit made of 3 distinct layers, a structure any modern outdoor clothing company would envy. Directly against the skin lay a dense, fine undercoat, soft as cashmere, trapping warm air close to the body. Above that lay coarser guard hairs, and on the outside hung the long guard hairs, sometimes reaching a meter in length, falling almost to the ground. This outer layer formed a skirt that shielded the sensitive legs and belly from the biting wind. But the mammoth had one more trick up its sleeve, glands that constantly secreted an oily substance. If you had stroked a mammoth, your hands would have come away greasy. This oil impregnated the fur, making it water-resistant, so that wet snow would not freeze solid against the body. A mammoth was not simply dressed warmly, it wore its own built-in raincoat. The true character of these animals showed most clearly in their faces. The tusks were far more than weapons against predators or rivals. They were tools as versatile as a Swiss army knife. When we examine fossil tusks recovered from gravel pits along the Rhine, we often find strange wear patterns. Some are worn more heavily on the right side, others on the left. This tells us something remarkable. Mammoths, like humans, were right-handed or left-handed. They used their tusks as snowplows. In the depths of winter, they swung their heads side to side to push aside the snow cover and reach the frozen grass underneath. These tusks were their key to survival, the door that opened the pantry buried beneath the snow. Behind these tusks worked another remarkable machine, the teeth. Mammoths had only 4 molars in use at any one time, but these were gigantic, roughly the size of a shoebox, ridged like a washboard, because the steppe grass, loaded with silica from constant dust, acted like sandpaper, grinding the teeth down rapidly. Nature had a solution. A mammoth replaced its teeth as many as 6 times across its lifetime, each new set sliding forward like a conveyor belt. Only once the final set wore down, around the age of 60, could the animal no longer feed, and it would die of starvation. A fate it shares with modern elephants. But a mammoth was more than the sum of its biological parts. It was a deeply social creature, equipped with an intelligence not far behind our own. We need to abandon any image of these animals as mindless walls of flesh. They lived in complex matriarchal herds. An older, experienced matriarch led the group. She was the memory of the herd. She knew the safest paths through the bogs, where water could still be found in the depths of winter, and which valleys to avoid because cave lions lurked there. This knowledge was passed down across generations. Young mammoths grew up surrounded by a web of care and protection. When danger threatened, the adults formed a defensive ring, pulling the calves into the center and presenting attackers with an impenetrable wall of tusks and furious trunks. There is evidence suggesting that mammoths mourned their dead, that they touched the bones of their fallen kin, perhaps even held some understanding of mortality itself. This emotional depth makes them feel strangely familiar to us. They were not monsters. They were families. Another often overlooked feature was the distinctive hump on their shoulders, clearly visible in many cave paintings. Scientists once believed this was simply an elevated spine. Today we know it was a fat reserve, similar to the hump of a camel, combined with a powerful muscle mass needed to support the heavy skull. This fat store was the mammoth's battery. During the brief summer, they built up this reserve to draw on through the dark, hungry winter months. They were masters of energy management. The presence of these animals shaped the entire landscape around them. Mammoths were the landscape architects of the Ice Age. We call such creatures keystone species. Through their constant wandering, trampling and feeding, they kept the steppe open. They tore down young trees before forests could establish themselves. They churned the soil, creating niches for smaller plants and animals. Without mammoths, the mammoth steppe might have grown over and impoverished itself. They created their own habitat simply by existing within it. Germany holds rich traces of these kings. One of the most impressive skeletons was discovered in Bavaria, a massive bull that died there 45,000 years ago. Standing before these bones, the sheer scale becomes overwhelming. You feel small, almost insignificant, and you find yourself wondering what this world must have sounded like. It was certainly not silent. The deep, rumbling calls these animals used to communicate, infrasonic sounds carrying for kilometers, must have made the very air of the Ice Age tremble. It was the soundtrack of a world still wild, still untamed. But even the king of the Ice Age was not alone. He shared his kingdom with a neighbor who followed a very different, far more brutal philosophy. While the mammoth was the dignified soul of the steppe, lurking in the tall grass was a creature that resembled less an animal and more a bad-tempered armored tank, a nearsighted colossus of muscle and horn that likely charged at anything that moved and whose very existence proves that nature was equally willing to build living fortresses that even Stone Age weapons could barely scratch. This was the woolly rhinoceros. If the woolly mammoth was the dignified king of the steppe, ruling through calm and family bonds, its neighbor was its exact opposite. Picture yourself walking through a misty river valley along the Rhine 30,000 years in the past. Visibility is poor, barely 20 meters. Suddenly you hear a snort, not a trumpet, not a call, but an explosive, steaming sound, like a pressure valve releasing on some massive machine. The ground vibrates, but differently than under a mammoth's tread. The footsteps are harder, faster, more aggressive. Out of the fog bursts a shape that looks as though evolution decided to wrap a tank in fur. Before you stands Coelodonta antiquitatis, the woolly rhinoceros. This was an encounter that would have frozen the blood of our ancestors. While mammoths often tried to resolve conflict through sheer presence and threat displays, the woolly rhinoceros was a creature of pure temper, one that likely operated on a simple principle: charge first, ask questions later. And it had good reason. On the open steppe, where no trees offered cover, attack was often the best defense. Let us look at this animal more closely, for it is one of the most fascinating examples of adaptation found anywhere in Europe. A full-grown woolly rhinoceros was an imposing presence, roughly 2 tons in weight, about 1.7 meters tall at the shoulder, and up to 3.5 meters long. But these numbers do not capture the impression this animal left behind. It sat low to the ground, its legs stocky and short, its body like a solid block. This compact build gave it a real physical advantage, a low center of gravity. Knocking a woolly rhinoceros off its feet was nearly impossible. It stood like a boulder in the storm. Its most striking feature, though, was its head, massive, heavy, crowned with 2 enormous horns. The front horn could reach a length of over 1 meter. When we examine these horns in museums today, a detail often goes unnoticed. The horn was not round and pointed like those of modern African rhinos. It was flattened from the side, resembling a giant curved sword or a shovel blade. Why? Because this horn was not merely a weapon. It was the animal's most essential survival tool. Just like the mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros needed to reach the frozen grass buried beneath the winter snow. But where the mammoth used its tusks and trunk, the rhinoceros lowered its heavy head and swept the snow aside with its flattened horn, swinging its skull back and forth in a motion that demanded enormous strength. To support this heavy head and constant pendulum movement, the animal carried a massive muscle hump in its neck, much like the hump of a bison. This neck hump was the engine that powered its snow shovel. The life of a woolly rhinoceros was likely a solitary one. Unlike the social mammoths, these animals typically wandered alone, or perhaps as a mother and calf pair, across the tundra. This isolation, combined with a particular biological weakness, made them extremely dangerous. Like their modern relatives, woolly rhinos were severely nearsighted. On the open plain, their eyesight offered little help. They relied instead on hearing and an extraordinary sense of smell. But when an animal cannot see well and lives alone in a world full of predators, a certain paranoia develops. Anything that moved and could not immediately be identified as harmless was treated as a threat. A human appearing in the tall grass, with the wind carrying their scent in the wrong direction, could trigger an immediate charge. And such a charge was devastating. Imagine the kinetic force, 2 tons of muscle and bone barreling toward you at 40 or 50 kilometers per hour, led by a horn over 1 meter long made of solid keratin. There was almost nothing in the Ice Age that could stop a charge like this. Even mammoths likely gave an angry woolly rhinoceros a wide and respectful berth. Yet the woolly rhinoceros was not only a brute, it was also a master of survival. Its fur, much like the mammoth's, was perfectly adapted to the cold, though structured differently. It was often reddish-brown to dark brown, extremely thick and shaggy. In the permafrost of Siberia, mummified remains of these animals have been recovered, some with stomach contents still intact, offering us an intimate glimpse into their diet and revealing a surprise. The woolly rhinoceros was something of a connoisseur of the steppe. While mammoths often grazed on coarse grasses, the rhinoceros specialized in herbs, low shrubs, lichens, and moss. Its low-hanging head was a perfect adaptation for this close-to-the-ground foraging. It was the lawnmower of the Ice Age, keeping vegetation trimmed and encouraging the growth of fresh new plants. Across what is now Germany, the woolly rhinoceros was widespread. There is hardly a gravel pit along the Rhine or in central Germany that has not yielded teeth or bones from these animals. This tells us how successful the species truly was. They were not rare curiosities, but a constant presence across the landscape, belonging here just as deer or wild boar belong to our forests today. It is a strange thought that along the banks of rivers we know well today, animals once lived that we now associate with the African savanna, only in a far tougher, far darker version. One especially fascinating detail comes to us from the artists of the Stone Age. In a famous cave in France, breathtaking drawings of woolly rhinoceroses survive, and there we see something bones alone cannot tell us. The animals are depicted with a broad black band running across their bellies. For a long time, researchers debated whether this was simply artistic license. Today, many believe it reflects the actual coloring of the animal's coat. A dark band against lighter fur. Details like this suddenly bring the animal to life. It was not merely a grey monster. It had character. It had color. Despite their armor and aggression, these animals were not invincible. Skeletal remains often show healed rib fractures or damaged horns, evidence of brutal battles, likely between bulls competing for territory or mates. When two of these living tanks collided, the sound must have carried for kilometers, a dry crack of horn against horn, or horn against rib. The woolly rhinoceros stood as a symbol of one particular strategy in nature: defense through intimidation. "Leave me alone, and you will live longer," seemed to be its unspoken motto. They were the surly guardians of the steppe, unmovable and stoic. But even the thickest armor has its weak points, and even the most aggressive rhinoceros eventually has to sleep, or grows old and slow. In this world of giants, a balance of power existed. Herbivores armed themselves with size, with herd behavior, or, as in the rhinoceros's case, with armor and aggression. But evolution on the side of the predators never rested either. Armor is useless against an enemy that is faster, smarter, and works as a team. There was a shadow in the steppe that taught even these colossal herbivores to fear. A creature that was no clumsy fighting machine, but rather an artist of killing. While the woolly rhinoceros relied on raw violence, the next predator in our story perfected the art of the ambush and the precision kill. We now leave the world of lumbering colossi and step into the realm of the ultimate hunter. He was larger than any lion or tiger alive today, and his roar was the last sound many Ice Age animals ever heard. Prepare yourself to look the ruler of the food chain in the eye. The mammoth steppe was a place of extreme visibility. There were no dense forests to vanish into, no undergrowth to hide within. Standing in that endless expanse, one often felt watched. And that feeling rarely lied, because as massive as the herbivores of the Ice Age were, mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, they all lived in constant fear of a shadow that moved almost invisibly through the tall golden grass, a shadow that was silent until it was too late. We are not speaking here of wolves or hyenas. We are speaking of the ultimate carnivore of this era, the king of predators, the European cave lion, Panthera spelaea. When we hear the word lion today, we picture the golden cats of the African savanna, manes flowing in the wind, roaring beneath the equatorial sun. But the European cave lion belonged to an entirely different category of predator. Forget everything you know about lions and scale it upward. These animals were, on average, 10 to 25% larger than their modern African relatives. A full-grown male could reach a length of over 3 meters and likely weighed up to 400 kilograms. Imagine a tiger, but with the muscle mass of a grizzly bear and the social intelligence of a lion. That was the reality that once prowled through what is today Bavaria, the Rhine Valley, and as far north as Lower Saxony. The name cave lion is, in fact, one of paleontology's biggest misunderstandings. These animals were not cave dwellers, not shadowy creatures crouching in the dark. They were rulers of the open steppe. The name comes from the fact that we mostly find their bones in caves. But why? Because they often went there to hunt other animals, or to die. The cave was not their living room. It was often their battlefield, or their grave. Their true kingdom lay beneath the open sky. What did this animal truly look like? Thanks to remarkable preservation in the permafrost and the detailed artistry of our ancestors, we have an almost photorealistic picture. In a famous painted cave in France, a mural depicts a pride of these lions, and this image reveals a crucial detail many reconstructions get wrong. The males had no mane, or only a sparse one. In the icy, windy steppe, a large, dark mane would likely have been more hindrance than asset, unnecessary weight that would mat in wet snow or betray the animal's camouflage during a hunt. These lions looked more streamlined, more powerfully built through the neck, but without the regal crown we associate with lions today. Their fur was dense and pale, perhaps sandy or light grey, perfect camouflage against the dry grass of the steppe. They were ghosts. You only saw them once they attacked. The hunting strategy of the cave lion must have differed radically from that of modern lions because its prey was entirely different. In Africa, lions hunt zebra, wildebeest, antelope. In the Ice Age, they faced living fortresses. You do not simply bring down a woolly rhinoceros or a young mammoth. It takes strength, coordination, and an almost suicidal determination. Scientists believe cave lions hunted in prides, much like their modern relatives. But these prides were likely smaller, specialized strike teams. Picture a scene along an ancient river valley. A small herd of steppe bison passes by, powerful animals with high shoulder humps and sharp horns. The lions approach against the wind, using every fold in the terrain, every boulder as cover. The tension is palpable. When the attack comes, it explodes in a burst of raw muscle. Cave lions were not built for long chases. They were sprinters and wrestlers. They had to drive their prey to the ground through sheer force. Bones of their victims often show bite marks at the throat or neck, evidence of a bite force capable of shattering bone like dry wood. There was, however, one prey species that tells a particular story of rivalry and conflict between two predators. Isotope analysis of cave lion bones, a method that reconstructs diet through chemical signatures has revealed something remarkable. These lions specialized in hunting reindeer. Yes, but they also preyed on bears, and not just any bears, cave bears. These bears were themselves giants, and they used caves for hibernation. The lion knew this. It ventured deep into the darkness, into the territory of its rival, to attack bears that were sluggish or asleep through the winter. It was a clash of titans fought in absolute darkness. Sometimes the lion won, dragging the carcass back out. Sometimes the bear woke in time and the lion remained in the cave forever. This explains the many lion bones found deep within these mountain chambers. The importance of this animal to Ice Age humans cannot be overstated. It was not only an enemy, it was a totem. In a cave in southern Germany, one of the most fascinating sculptures in human history was discovered. The Lion Man, a 30-centimeter figure carved from mammoth ivory, with the body of a man and the head of a cave lion, roughly 40,000 years old. Considering our ancestors spent hundreds of hours by flickering firelight carving this figure, one cannot help but wonder, was it a wish to claim the lion's unbeatable strength for themselves? Or was it simply an attempt to confront their own constant fear of the dark through art? When we walk through German forests today, the largest predator we might encounter is perhaps a lynx or a wolf. The thought that a cat once ruled this very ground, one more powerful than a modern Siberian tiger, changes how we see the landscape entirely. It lends it a wild, untamed depth. The cave lion stood at the absolute top of the food chain on open land. Nothing hunted it, except, perhaps, humans, and even that was a risk taken only in the direst circumstances. But even the king had his limits, specializing in massive prey, and a life built around the cold made him vulnerable to change. As the great herds of the megafauna dwindled at the end of the Ice Age, as open steppe gave way to dense forest, the cave lion lost his kingdom. He was built for the open expanse, not for thickets. His size, once his greatest advantage, became his downfall. He could no longer move silently enough through the new forests, could no longer find enough meat to sustain his massive body. The European cave lion vanished roughly 14,000 years ago, but it did not go quietly. It left a gap in the ecosystem that has never truly been filled. Today, Europe has no great cats left at all. The reign of the lions is history now, preserved only in carved ivory and in the dim corners of our museums. But wait, we spoke earlier of caves, of the lion venturing inside to hunt. So who was the target? Who truly owned these underground cathedrals? While the lion ruled the surface deep within the mountains, in damp, dark caverns, another power reigned. A creature so tightly bound to the very word Ice Age that almost nothing else compares, and whose sheer mass made even the lion look like a lightweight by comparison. The caves of southern Germany, the Harz Mountains, and the Alps were not empty. They were occupied, and the tenants were not welcoming hosts. If you thought the lion was frightening, wait until you see what waits in the dark. We now leave the bright grasslands behind and descend into darkness. Light your torches, for in the depths we meet the true masters of the Ice Age underworld, bears that broke every scale we know. And if you thought a grizzly was large, prepare to be proven wrong. Let us peer into the throat of the cave, but quietly. We do not want to wake anyone. Darkness inside a cave is not simply the absence of light. It is a physical force. It presses against the eyes, heavy and impenetrable. The air is damp, close, almost motionless. If we visited a show cave in Germany's mountains today, we would be guided by colored floodlights along paved paths. But let us extinguish that light and step back in time, 40,000 years. The first thing you would notice would not be dripping water, but a smell, a sharp, heavy stench of ammonia, wet fur, droppings, and decay, thick enough to take your breath away. You have not entered a cathedral of silence. You have entered a bedroom, and the residents are home. Here, deep in the belly of the mountains, ruled Ursus spelaeus, the cave bear, one of the most prominent animals of the European Ice Age, and one that has left more traces across Germany than almost any other creature. In numerous caves bearing its name, thousands upon thousands of bones have been recovered. For centuries, farmers mistook these enormous bones and skulls and the remains of dragons, which is why so many caves still carry names referencing dragons today. The truth, though more mundane, was equally astonishing. These mountains were the fortresses of a bear species that dwarfed anything we know today. A full-grown male cave bear was a colossus. When it reared up onto its hind legs, and its anatomy suggests it likely did this deliberately to intimidate rivals, it could reach a height of 3.5 meters, towering over everything. Its shoulders were massive, built like a battering ram. Compared to a modern brown bear, even a large Kodiak bear, the cave bear appeared bulkier, heavier, almost barrel-shaped. It was not an athlete. It was a sumo wrestler. Particularly striking was its forehead. While modern bears have a relatively flat snout, the cave bear had a pronounced step, a steep stop in its skull profile, giving it an almost mastiff-like, but gigantic, appearance. This created space for enormous chewing muscles. And here lies the biggest surprise of all. Looking into the eyes of such a monster, you would expect a bloodthirsty beast, a carnivore that killed everything in its path. Science tells us a different story. Nitrogen analysis of the bones and microscopic examination of the teeth reveal that the cave bear was overwhelmingly herbivorous. It was the gentle giant of the Ice Age. It rarely used its tremendous strength for hunting, but primarily for digging up roots, raiding berry bushes, and crushing tough plant matter. It was a gigantic eating machine that had to use the brief summer to pack on hundreds of kilograms of fat. Its diet resembled that of a cow far more than that of a lion. But why would a vegetarian need such monstrous size and strength? The answer lies in competition for the safest place on Earth, the cave. Caves were the ultimate luxury during the Ice Age. Outside raged storms that could freeze skin within seconds. Inside, a constant temperature offered shelter from wind and wet. Everyone wanted in. The cave bear had not developed its size for hunting, but for intimidation. It had to defend its territory against cave lions, hyenas, and wolves, all of whom wanted to use these caves as dens or hunting grounds. Traces of this struggle over shelter are still visible today. In many German caves, we find what are called bear polish marks, rock walls so smooth they gleam like marble under torchlight. These were not shaped by water, but by the fur of thousands of bears that rubbed against the same spots for thousands of years, scraping off mud and parasites or simply marking territory. If you run your hand across one of these polished walls today, you are touching a spot where, 30,000 years ago, a creature weighing as much as a small car once stood and scratched itself. It is one of the most intimate connections we have left to the Ice Age. But the cave was also a trap. Cave bears spent the winter in deep hibernation, defenseless during this time. We already heard how cave lions ventured deep into these mountains. For a sleeping bear, this was the ultimate nightmare. Many of the bones we find belong to bears killed in their sleep, or to bears that simply did not have enough fat reserves and never woke again. The caves became mass graves. Generation after generation died in the same places, and the layers of bone grew meters thick over time. But the cave bear was not the only giant bear of this era. While Ursus spelaeus dominated the European mountains, embodying the comfortable, if formidable, gatherer, another relative roamed across the other side of the Atlantic and parts of Eurasia. One that seemed pulled straight from a horror film, the short-faced bear Arctodus simus. If the cave bear was the wrestler, the short-faced bear was the sprinter. It was the largest land predator of the Ice Age. Picture a bear not standing on sturdy, pillar-like legs, but on long, slender limbs, almost like an oversized dog. On all four legs, this bear could already look a human directly in the eye. Standing upright, it reached nearly 4 meters, and it was its anatomy that inspired true fear. It was built for speed. It was no leisurely forager. Its skull was short and broad, built for an immense bite force capable of crushing bone. It was a carnivore, a scavenger, and an active hunter capable of chasing prey across great distances. Why mention it here, in the context of European caves? To illustrate the sheer range of forms evolution produced. Nature experimented with the very concept of what a bear could be. In the tight valleys and mountains of Europe, the massive, plant-eating, armored cave bear was the winning formula. In the open plains of North America and Asia, the long-legged, running bear, the short-faced bear, was the answer to the same challenge. Both were giants. Both were responses to cold and the relentless demand for efficiency. Back in Europe, the greatest threat to the cave bear ultimately came not from the lion and not from the cold, but from a new player who broke all the rules: humans. Neanderthals and later modern humans needed exactly the same thing the bear did: the cave. Picture the scene. A group of hunters arrives as darkness falls and a blizzard builds. They need shelter immediately. But from the depths comes the growl of an awakening giant. It was the first housing war in history. Archaeological finds, such as a spearhead lodged within a bear's vertebra, bear witness to these brutal conflicts. Humans had fire and ranged weapons. The bear had only its strength and the darkness. There is a theory, once very popular, of a so-called bear cult. In certain caves, bear skulls have been found arranged with apparent care, stacked or placed within stone enclosures. Did early humans see something spiritual in these bears? Did they offer a kind of reverence to the giant they had to kill in order to survive? Even though modern archaeologists remain skeptical, and many of these arrangements may be explained through natural processes, the idea remains fascinating. The bear was more similar to humans than almost any other animal. It could stand on two legs. It used its paws like hands. It raised its young while sitting upright. Killing one must have felt different from killing a bison. The disappearance of the cave bear remains a puzzle still debated today. It vanished earlier than many other giants, its decline beginning roughly 24,000 years ago. Was it too specialized? As the climate shifted and plant diversity declined, perhaps this pure vegetarian simply could no longer find enough food to survive its long hibernation. Or was it humans who literally stole the roof over its head? When humans began occupying caves permanently, building fires, making noise, they disturbed hibernating bears. A bear that wakes midwinter and is driven out burns through its reserves and dies. It is entirely possible that we did not wipe out these giants through hunting alone, but through simple disturbance of their rest. Today, the caves stand empty. Only the polished walls and the great piles of bone remain, reminders of a time when humans were not yet the masters of these spaces, but merely anxious guests. The silence inside a cave today is peaceful, but it is also a kind of monument. We have now seen the armored herbivores and the gigantic bears that ruled the underworld. But above, on the open land, another hunter prowled, one whose name alone evokes terror and whose anatomy still puzzles scientists today. It did not rely on sheer size like the bear, nor on pack strength like the lion. It was a precision instrument of evolution. It carried 2 daggers in its mouth, as long as a human forearm. Many myths surround this creature, and most of them are wrong. It was not a tiger, but something else entirely, Smilodon. Yet these famous teeth were not crude weapons for wild slashing. They were tools built for a single surgical strike, one that had to land perfectly. There are images burned into humanity's collective memory, even though no living person has ever seen them with their own eyes. When we think of the Ice Age, 2 things come instantly to mind: the mammoth, and perhaps even more iconic, a predator's jaw with 2 monstrous curved daggers protruding from it. The saber-toothed cat. It is the superstar of paleontology, the ultimate symbol of a wild, unforgiving nature. And yet almost everything we commonly believe about this animal is wrong. It was not a tiger. It was not even built like a cat that chased its prey across open ground. And its famous teeth were not weapons for wild combat, but precision instruments, so fragile that a single mistake could destroy them forever. To truly understand Smilodon, the scientific name for this giant, we must abandon our image of a modern big cat. If you visit a zoo today and watch a tiger move, you see fluid, elongated elegance. A tiger is like an Olympic sprinter and long jumper combined. Smilodon, by contrast, was a bodybuilder, a heavyweight wrestler. The largest species, Smilodon populator, which roamed South America, could weigh up to 400 kilograms, considerably more than the heaviest Siberian tiger alive today. But the mass was distributed differently. Smilodon had an extremely powerful upper body, a thick neck, and forelimbs so densely muscled they almost looked deformed. Its hind legs, by comparison, were relatively short and weak. This tells us everything about its strategy. It was no runner. It could never chase an antelope across kilometers of open ground. It was an ambush predator, a master of close-quarters combat. It needed to get close, very close, and when it attacked, it was not a chase, it was a wrestling match. It used its massive forelimbs to pin prey, perhaps a young mammoth, a bison, or a wild horse, to the ground with raw force. And only once the victim lay helpless, barely able to move, did the most famous weapon of the Ice Age come into play. The canine teeth, the famous sabers, could grow up to 28 centimeters long in Smilodon, longer than the height of a human head. They extended well past the lower jaw, even when the mouth was closed. But look closer at these teeth. They were flattened from the side, like true blades, finely serrated along the back edge like a steak knife. This made them extraordinarily sharp, but also dangerously fragile. Imagine carrying two long glass daggers in your mouth. If you bit down directly onto bone, or if struggling prey wrenched its head violently to the side, these blades could snap. A broken tooth never grew back. For a Smilodon, this often meant a slow death by starvation. This led to a hunting technique that resembled surgery more than savage combat. Evolution had equipped Smilodon with a jaw capable of opening to an almost absurd angle, far beyond what a modern lion can manage. Yet its overall bite force was surprisingly weak, barely stronger than that of a large dog. So how does an animal kill large prey with a weak bite? The answer lies in the neck. Smilodon possessed extremely powerful neck muscles. It would open its jaw wide, position the teeth precisely against the soft throat of its pinned victim, and then drive the upper jaw downward using the full force of its neck. It was not a bite in the conventional sense. It was a strike. The blades sliced cleanly and deeply through windpipe and major arteries. The victim bled out or suffocated within seconds. A death that was fast, almost merciful, provided the first strike landed correctly. While Smilodon was primarily found in the Americas, Europe, including what is now Germany, had its own version of this terror, Homotherium, the scimitar-toothed cat. Its remains have also been found in regions that were once dry land beneath today's North Sea, and at a famous archaeological site in Lower Saxony, where some of humanity's oldest known throwing spears were also discovered. These cats lived side by side with our ancestors there. It is an unsettling thought. Early humans armed only with wooden spears, sharing their world with predators specialized in killing thick-skinned giants. A human would have been, technically, too small and too thin to be ideal prey for these massive teeth, built for thick necks. But desperation makes any predator opportunistic, and an encounter in the tall grass of the northern European steppe could easily have turned fatal. Returning to Smilodon, there is one place on Earth that has told us more about these animals than any other site combined: the tar pits of Los Angeles. There, over thousands of years, animals became trapped in sticky asphalt. Their death cries lured in predators, hoping for an easy meal, predators who then became trapped themselves. Thousands of Smilodon skeletons have been recovered from these pits, and these bones tell a story that overturns our image of the lone, solitary killer entirely. Many of the recovered skeletons show severe injuries that had healed during the animal's lifetime. Broken hips, shattered ribs, worn joints, injuries so serious the animal could not possibly have hunted for months. In nature, this normally means death. A solitary hunter, unable to hunt, starves within weeks. That these animals survived, and that their bones healed, allows only one conclusion. They were not alone. Someone fed them, or at least allowed them to feed at a kill, without having to fight for it. This strongly suggests that Smilodon lived in social groups, similar to modern lion prides, perhaps family units that cared for their injured members. This idea gives the monster a surprisingly gentle, almost human side. In the middle of the brutal Ice Age, in a world of eat or be eaten, there was solidarity even among killers. So when you picture a Smilodon, do not see only a lone murder machine. Picture instead a group resting in the shade of a rock outcrop, grooming one another, perhaps allowing an old, limping veteran the best cut of meat. But this exact specialization, the enormous teeth, the massive build, the dependence on very large prey, became Smilodon's undoing. As the great herbivores of the Ice Age went extinct, Smilodon faced a world with nothing left to offer. It was too cumbersome to chase deer or rabbits. Its teeth were useless against small prey. It was a tool perfected for a single task, and once that task disappeared, the tool became obsolete. Evolution is merciless. Anyone who specializes too narrowly plays a dangerous game. Smilodon bet everything on one card and lost. Its extinction roughly 10,000 years ago marks the end of an era. Nature has never again produced a design quite like it. Modern big cats are generalists, adaptable and versatile. The saber-tooth remains a singular experiment in the history of life. Looking at these skeletons today, we feel a strange mixture of fear and admiration. Those teeth seem almost too large to belong to a living organism, reminding us just how far nature can push the boundaries of a single niche. While Smilodon ruled as the undisputed top predator in its South American homeland, and in a slightly different form, roamed as far as North America, another animal there redefined the very concept of size. A creature so bizarre that the first scientists who discovered its bones believed they were looking at a monster from another dimension entirely. It was not a predator, but it was so massive that even Smilodon gave it a wide berth. Forget everything you know about the slow, gentle creatures that hang lazily from trees today. The animal we visit next is proof that the Ice Age could turn even the laziest of creatures into a titanic fortress. We cross the ocean now into the homeland of Smilodon to meet a giant that, standing on its hind legs, could look straight into the second floor of a house. Prepare yourself for Megatherium, the giant ground sloth. And believe me, there was nothing lazy about this animal, except, perhaps, its metabolism. If you visit a zoo on a rainy afternoon and stand in the tropical house, you might see, high in the branches, a bundle of fur hanging almost motionless, and when it does move, it does so in a slow motion that borders on painful to watch. The modern sloth is the embodiment of slowness. It is harmless, endearing, and feeds on leaves so low in energy that the animal genuinely lacks the strength to move quickly. It is a shadow in the canopy, hoping never to be noticed. Now erase that image completely from your mind, because the animal we turn to next, while a direct relative of that gentle bundle of fur, seems to come from an entirely different dimension. Traveling back to South America during the late Ice Age, we encounter a creature so absurdly gigantic that the first scientists to examine its bones, in the late 18th century, believed they had found the remains of a monster that defied every law of biology. They called it Megatherium, the Great Beast, a name that, if anything, understates the reality. Picture yourself standing on an open plain in what is today Argentina. The ground is dry, the grass tall. Suddenly, the sun darkens. Before you, a colossus rises onto its hind legs, reaching a height of 6 meters, taller than a street lamp, taller than the second floor of a house. If this animal walked through a modern city street today, it could comfortably peer into second-story windows and clear out the flower boxes without even stretching. Megatherium weighed up to 4 tons, roughly the weight of a fully grown African elephant. But unlike the elephant, which stands on 4 pillar-like legs, Megatherium had a peculiar habit. It liked to sit. Its anatomy was unique. It possessed a massive, muscular tail, thick as a tree trunk, which, together with its powerful hind legs, formed a stable tripod. This allowed the animal to rear upright with confidence, freeing both forelimbs. At the end of these limbs were not hands in any conventional sense, but enormous, sickle-shaped claws, up to 50 centimeters long, half a meter of curved bone and keratin. These claws were so long that Megatherium could not walk flat-footed. It had to walk on the outer edges of its feet, an odd, twisting gait that kept the claws turned inward to preserve their sharpness. Fossilized footprints, preserved in ancient mud, look almost human, only grotesquely enlarged and distorted. Why would a herbivore need such weapons? Certainly to pull down branches from tall trees that were out of reach for other animals. In a world where food could be scarce, reach was a decisive advantage. Megatherium was the undisputed master of the high canopy, without ever needing to climb. It simply pulled the canopy down to itself. But these claws served a second purpose as well: defense. We spoke earlier of Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat. South America was home to the largest and most dangerous species of this predator. And yet, even for a group of these formidable cats, a full-grown Megatherium was a fortress better left unchallenged. A single blow from claws 50 centimeters long, driven by the muscle mass of a 4-ton animal, could shatter the skull of a lion or tiger like an eggshell. Megatherium did not need to flee. It was too slow to outrun anything, but too powerful to die easily. There was one more layer of defense, discovered only when researchers found preserved skin fragments in dry caves. Beneath the dense, shaggy fur, likely teeming with parasites, lay a hidden armor. Embedded within the skin were thousands of tiny bony plates, called osteoderms. The animal literally wore chainmail beneath its hide. When a predator bit down, it did not meet soft flesh, but an organic cobblestone surface. This combination of immense size, lethal claws, and armored skin made the giant ground sloth nearly invulnerable. The existence of this animal has left traces that survive in our supermarkets today. Have you ever wondered why the avocado has such an impractically large seed? In nature, a seed this size makes little sense. What animal could swallow it whole and pass it unharmed, spreading it to new ground? Too large for any bird, toxic or impassable for most modern mammals. The answer is Megatherium. The avocado evolved as a snack for giant ground sloths. These giants swallowed the fruit whole. The massive seed traveled through their enormous digestive tract and was eventually deposited kilometers away within a steaming pile of natural fertilizer. Without Megatherium and its relatives, the avocado would likely have gone extinct itself. It is something of an evolutionary ghost, a fruit still waiting for a partner that will never return. Every time you eat guacamole, you are holding a direct link to this vanished giant. Yet the image of the peaceful herbivore has cracked somewhat in recent years. Some paleontologists propose a darker theory. Those massive forelimbs, those powerful muscles, were they really only meant for pulling leaves? Analysis of the elbow joints suggests Megatherium was capable of extremely fast, forceful movement. Some researchers now believe it may have been an opportunistic carnivore. If it encountered another animal's carcass, or stumbled upon a kill made by a smilodon, it might have used its strength to steal the meal, or even to kill prey directly itself. Imagine that, a 4-ton sloth that did not simply eat leaves, but actively hunted. It is a thought that transforms this curious giant into an absolute nightmare. When humans first reached South America, they encountered these walking mountains. We can only imagine what passed through the minds of our ancestors the first time they watched a Megatherium rear up before them. It must have felt like an unstoppable force of nature. And picturing that scene raises an obvious question. Standing there in the tall grass, armed with nothing but a sharpened stick, would you have found the courage to challenge a giant like this? Or would the mere sight of it have sent you running in blind panic? But humans are resourceful. In North America and Patagonia, evidence suggests that people did hunt these giants. We call such locations kill sites. How do you take down an armored colossus like this? Likely not in close combat. Hunters probably exploited the animal's slowness, driving it into swampy ground where its enormous feet would sink, and then attacking from a distance with spears. The disappearance of Megatherium, somewhere between 10 and 12,000 years ago, marks one of the great losses in the history of biodiversity. It was among the last of the great megafauna to vanish. With it disappeared a form of life with no modern equivalent. There are no medium-sized giant sloths today, only the small, tree-dwelling cousins that survive. It is as though an entire family of giants was wiped from the earth, leaving only the small, unassuming relatives who, simply by being unremarkable, were allowed to live on. standing before a megatherium skeleton today. In any major natural history museum, it is the sheer impossibility of its proportions that draws you in. The pelvis is as wide as a small car. The thigh bones are thicker than a human torso. It stands as a monument to excess, proof that when given enough resources and enough time, nature recognizes no limits. We have now traveled across the world. We have seen mammoths in the north, rhinoceroses and lions in Europe, and giant sloths in the south. Everywhere on Earth, the same principle ruled: grow large or perish. But one question still hangs over all these giants like a blade suspended above them. Why did this happen, precisely within this window of time? Why did the world freeze, thaw, and freeze again, in a rhythm as precise as clockwork? What drives these engines of evolution? We must now lift our gaze from the ground. We must stop staring at bones and look instead toward the sky. Because the true conductor behind the fate of the mammoth, the giant sloth, and indeed our own fate as well, lies not on Earth at all. It lies out in the cold vacuum of space. It is a story of gravity, of planetary orbits, and of our planet's shifting position relative to the Sun. It sounds like dry astrophysics, but it is, in truth, the most dramatic mechanism in our entire solar system, and it is still running today. So far, we have looked into the gaping jaws of saber-toothed cats, felt the thundering steps of mammoth herds, and feared the shadows lurking within ancient caves. We have focused on blood, fur, and the daily struggle for survival that played out across the surface of our planet. But to truly understand why this world existed at all, why Europe lay buried beneath ice sheets reaching deep into the continent, we need to radically shift our gaze. We need to stop looking down and look up instead, far up. The true cause behind the fate of the woolly mammoth, the cave bear, and so many others, lies not in biology. It does not lie in the forests or the steppes. It lies in the cold, silent vacuum of space. The story of the Ice Ages is, in truth, a story of astronomy, a tale of gravity, dancing planets, and a cosmic clockwork, so precise and so relentless that it determines the fate of every living cell on Earth. To understand this, we need to travel back, not into the Ice Age itself, but into the year 1914. In a prison cell in Budapest sat a Serbian mathematician and engineer named Milutin Milankovic. While outside the First World War raged and the world descended into chaos, Milankovic searched for a higher order. He asked himself a question so vast it almost seemed arrogant. How much sunlight had the Earth received over the past 600,000 years? Without computer, armed only with pen, paper, and a brilliant mind, he began to calculate. And what he discovered was nothing less than the heartbeat of our planet. He found that the Earth does not simply follow its orbit in a fixed, unchanging way. It dances, it wobbles, it breathes. Milankovic identified 3 enormous cycles on 3 gears within the great clockwork of the heavens that determine whether we live through the paradise of a warm age or the hell of an ice age. Let us look at these 3 gears, because they are turning still, even as you listen to these words. The first gear is eccentricity. We learn in school that Earth orbits the Sun, and in our minds, that orbit is a perfect circle. But that is not quite true. Earth's orbit is elliptical, a slightly flattened circle. And crucially, this shape is not fixed. Through the gravitational pull of the other large planets, particularly the immense mass of Jupiter and Saturn, Earth's orbit is stretched and compressed across a cycle roughly 100,000 years long. It is as though an invisible elastic band sometimes pulls Earth closer to the Sun and sometimes pushes it further away. When the orbit becomes strongly elliptical, Earth, at its farthest point, drifts millions of kilometers further from the Sun than usual. Sunlight weakens. The energy reaching our planet drops. This is the baseline rhythm of the Ice Age, a 100,000-year cycle that sets the overall mood. But this alone is not enough to freeze the world. Here enters the second gear, the tilt of Earth's axis, known scientifically as obliquity. Picture the Earth as a spinning top. This top does not stand perfectly upright in space. It leans, currently at roughly 23 degrees. This tilt is what gives us our seasons. If the axis stood perfectly straight, we would live in eternal spring. But this tilt is not fixed either. Over a cycle of roughly 41,000 years, the Earth rocks back and forth like a ship in rolling waves, oscillating between about 22 and 24.5 degrees. Why does this matter? It sounds like a tiny shift, but for climate, it is the difference between life and death. When the tilt is smaller, the seasons become less extreme, and here lies the great secret Milankovitch uncovered. Ice ages are not caused by extremely cold winters. Harsh winters, on their own, do not matter much. Ice ages are caused by cool summers. This sounds paradoxical, but the logic holds. Think of mountain ranges in Norway or the Alps. In winter, snow falls there in abundance. That is entirely normal. What matters is what happens in summer. If summer is hot, the snow melts away completely and the next winter starts fresh. But if Earth's axis is tilted in such a way that summers in the northern hemisphere stay cool and weak, the sun cannot fully melt away the snow from the previous winter. A small remnant survives. When the next winter arrives, fresh snow falls on top of the old. Layer by layer, year after year, the snow compresses into ice. Meters become kilometers. A glacier is born, and then there is the third gear, the second hand of this great climatic clock, precession. The Earth wobbles like a top about to topple over. Its axis traces a slow circle in the sky, meaning the North Pole does not always point toward the same star. Every 26,000 years, this axis completes one full wobble. This cycle determines during which season Earth sits closest to the Sun. Currently, we are closest to the Sun in January, during the Northern Hemisphere's winter, which slightly softens our winters. But when this shifts and Earth sits closest to the Sun during summer instead, summers grow hotter and glaciers melt. When all three of these cycles align unfavorably, a strongly elliptical orbit, minimal axial tilt, and an unfavorable position within the precession cycle, the lock clicks into place. It is like a vault where every dial must align perfectly. When that happens, the entire system collapses into cold. This effect then amplifies itself through one of the most powerful mechanisms in physics, albedo. Snow and ice are white. They act as gigantic mirrors. Once large snowfields form across Scandinavia and Canada, they reflect sunlight directly back into space, instead of absorbing it as warmth. The Earth begins cooling itself further. The more ice there is, the colder it gets. The colder it gets, the more ice forms. It becomes a feedback loop, a spiral into cold that seems unstoppable. We can still touch the effects of this cosmic mechanism today, right here on the ground. If you walk through certain regions of northern Germany, you will often see large boulders scattered across open fields. Farmers call them erratics. Geologically, these rocks have no business being there. They are granite, originating from Scandinavia. How did they get here? They rode on the back of the ice, 20,000 years ago. At the height of the last glaciation, glaciers up to 3 kilometers thick pushed southward from Scandinavia, flattening everything in their path. The sheer weight of this ice was so immense that it pressed the Earth's crust downward. Scandinavia, in fact, is still rising today, slowly recovering from that ancient weight, like a mattress regaining its shape after someone stands up. The ice-carved valleys, built moraine hills, and dug out the lake basins we now treasure as vacation destinations. The landscape of Central Europe is a direct product of these cosmic cycles. It is a humbling realization. We humans like to think of ourselves as the architects of our world. We build cities, dams, roads. But in truth, we are passengers, riding a planet steered by the gravity of Jupiter and the angle of our tilt toward the sun. Our entire civilization, everything we have built over the past 10,000 years, the pyramids, ancient empires, modern technology, all of it unfolded during a brief, warm pause within this great cycle. We are children of the Holocene, this current warm period. But astronomically speaking, this warm stretch is little more than a short summer vacation. The cycles continue turning. The clockwork never truly stops. In purely theoretical terms, astronomy alone would eventually guide us back toward another ice age in the coming millennia, as eccentricity continues to shift. But today, there is a new factor Milankovitch could never have predicted: us. We have begun turning the dials of our own atmosphere, and no one knows precisely how the contest between human-driven carbon emissions and these ancient cosmic cycles will ultimately play out. Have we postponed the next ice age, or merely delayed it? But let us return to the past. The ice had arrived. The stage was set. The backdrop was glaciers, and the animals were giants, perfectly adapted to this frozen world. Yet into this frozen Eden, one final actor was about to step onto the stage. A creature that, physically speaking, seemed almost a joke. It had no warming fur like the mammoth. It had no armored hide like the rhinoceros. It had no claws like the bear, no daggers like the saber-tooth. It was bare, soft-skinned, and slow. By every measure, it should have frozen to death on its very first night. But this creature carried something else entirely: fire in its hands, and a weapon in its mind sharper than any flint blade ever struck. Into this world of monsters, humans arrived, and not just one kind of human. Several different species competed for dominance. One was a robust powerhouse, built for the cold. The other was a clever inventor from the south, How could a hairless primate survive in the death zone of the mammoth steppe? And not merely survive, but rise to become the most dangerous predator of them all? The answer leads us to an encounter that still shapes our own DNA to this day, because into this world of monsters, humans stepped into the arena of giants, and they did not come merely to watch. Picture standing in the middle of an ancient arena, but it is not the warm south. It is a snow-covered plain at 20 degrees below zero. And your opponent is not another human, but a 3-meter-tall woolly mammoth or an armor-breaking woolly rhinoceros. You have no armor, no firearm, not even particularly sharp teeth or claws. All you carry is a sharpened wooden stick tipped with stone, and a small group of companions. It sounds like a guaranteed death sentence. Physically speaking, humans in the Ice Age were something of a joke. We are slow. We have no fur. Our skin is thin and tears easily. In any direct contest of strength, we lose against any wolf, any bear, any big cat. And yet, here we stand today. We did not go extinct. We survived, and more than that, we became the most lethal predator this planet has ever produced. How was this possible? In the middle of an era defined by biological superweapons, a creature stepped onto the stage whose true power was invisible. It was intelligence, and this intelligence was put to use not merely to marvel at the giants, but to eat them. When we talk about humans in Ice Age Europe, we first need to rehabilitate an old acquaintance, long portrayed as a dim-witted, club-swinging brute, the Neanderthal. Forget the image of the hunched ape-man. The Neanderthal was the true European, shaped and forged by the ice. While our direct ancestors, Homo sapiens, were still developing in the warmth of Africa, Neanderthals had already spent hundreds of thousands of years in the cold, and evolution had molded them accordingly. Look closely at their build. They were shorter than us, on average, perhaps 1.0 to 1.6, 5 meters tall. But they were powerhouses. Their bones were thicker, their muscle attachments far more pronounced. They had broad, barrel-shaped chests, housing not only massive lungs, efficient at processing thin, cold air, but also retaining core body heat. They were the living embodiment of Bergmann's rule: compact, massive, energy efficient. Their faces functioned almost like built-in radiators. Their wide, broad noses were packed with mucous membranes that warmed icy air before it ever reached the delicate lungs. The Neanderthal was no primitive forerunner. He was a highly specialized end product of evolution, an Ice Age athlete, finely tuned for survival. But strength alone was not enough to bring down a mammoth. It took courage and a strategy that bordered on madness. Archaeologists studying Neanderthal bones have found a striking and unsettling pattern of injuries. Many show broken arms, shattered ribs, skull trauma. Interestingly, this pattern of injury closely resembles a very specific group of modern athletes, rodeo riders. This tells us everything about their hunting method. Neanderthals were close-range fighters. They had not yet developed bows, arrows, or spear throwers that allowed kills from a safe distance. Their spears were heavy, thick, thrusting weapons, not throwing weapons. To bring down an animal, they had to go in close. They had to get near enough to a woolly rhinoceros or a bison to smell its breath. They needed physical contact, driving the spear with both hands and the full force of their bodies into the soft flank or throat, and then holding on or leaping clear fast enough before the animal turned on them. It was a bloody, chaotic struggle for life. That they survived this regularly while still gathering enough food for their families speaks to extraordinary coordination and an almost telepathic level of teamwork. Neanderthals used the landscape itself as a weapon. They were the first true tacticians. In valleys across Central Europe, they drove herds into narrow passes, bogs, or cliff edges. They knew exactly when the reindeer migrated and where mammoths sought shelter in winter. They were not opportunistic scavengers waiting for lion leftovers. Isotope analysis of their bones shows they were top-level carnivores. Their meat consumption exceeded that of wolves or hyenas. They fed almost exclusively on the great herbivores. Mammoth steak was not a special occasion meal. It was their daily bread. But around 45,000 years ago, the dynamic across Europe shifted dramatically. A new player entered the field, arriving from the south, along the Balkans and the Danube Valley. Taller, leaner, less muscular, more vulnerable to the cold. Us, Homo sapiens, the anatomically modern human. At first glance, we appeared to be at a disadvantage. We froze faster. We were weaker in close combat. But we brought with us a technology that would shift the balance of power forever. The ranged weapon. Our ancestor developed the spear thrower, the atlatl, a wooden tool that extended the arm and amplified leverage. With it, a lighter spear could be thrown with greater speed and far greater distance. It was a revolution. Suddenly, there was no need to get within arm's reach of an enraged rhinoceros. One could strike from 30 or 40 meters away. The risk to the hunter dropped dramatically. While Neanderthals often suffered severe injuries and lost young members of their group, modern humans could hunt without being decimated in the process. This meant more survivors, more children, faster population growth. We also brought a different way of thinking, more connected, more networked. Shells from the Mediterranean found in caves far inland show that Homo sapiens maintained trade networks stretching hundreds of kilometers. If food ran short in one valley, perhaps word had already spread that help could be found 3 valleys over. We exchanged flint, knowledge, and stories. The meeting between Neanderthals and modern humans remains one of the most fascinating chapters of our shared history. Did we fight them? Did we wipe them out? The truth is more nuanced and far more intimate. We met them and we mixed with them. Nearly every person of European descent today carries roughly 2% Neanderthal DNA. Within our genes, these ancient Ice Age hunters live on still. They likely passed down genetic adaptations to cold and to diseases native to the European environment. It was not pure conquest. It was, at least in part, a merging. But for the megafauna, the arrival of these 2-legged super predators marked the beginning of the end. Imagine the situation from a mammoth's perspective. For millions of years, it only needed to fear predators that stalked or hunted in packs. It knew how to defend against a lion. But this new creature was different. It could create fire. It could turn night into day. It could dig traps, and it killed not only out of hunger. Humans began to see these animals not merely as food, but as raw material. In a treeless steppe, a mammoth bone was never simply waste. It was building material and fuel. Entire dwellings constructed from mammoth bone have been found in Eastern Europe. Bone marrow was burned for heat. Flutes were carved from bird bone and ivory, evidence of artistry found in caves across the Swabian Alps. Humans used everything. The pressure on animal populations rose exponentially. It was a deadly combination. These animals were accustomed to periodic climate shifts. They had survived ice ages for millions of years, but they had never before survived an ice age in which a highly intelligent, armed species actively hunted them down. It was as though a boxer, already staggering in the 12th round, suddenly faced a second opponent entering the ring, one carrying a club. But was it humanity alone that bore the blame? Was our hunger and our drive truly enough to wipe out millions of mammoths, rhinoceroses, and giant deer? Or were we simply the final drop that overflowed an already full cup? The evidence is complicated, resembling a crime story, where the scene of the crime is 10,000 years old. There is a theory suggesting we may be innocent, or at least deserving of some leniency, because at the very same time humanity rose to power, something else happened to the planet that changed the rules of the game entirely. The ice began to melt, but unlike previous cycles, this time something occurred that tore apart the biological structure of the Earth itself. A great extinction was on its way. The giants we have admired throughout this journey, the mammoth, the cave bear, the saber-toothed cat, were all heading now toward an invisible wall. We have seen how they lived, how they fought, and how they were hunted by humans. But their disappearance may be the greatest mystery of all. Why did elephants survive in Africa and tigers in India, while the rulers of the north vanished entirely? We are about to witness an apocalypse that began quietly and then ended with terrifying speed. We will see how the most powerful ecosystem on Earth collapsed, and why the end of the Ice Age was not, for everyone, a cause for celebration. Prepare yourself for the final chapter of a vanished world. The great dying begins, and the silence that follows still echoes today. It did not begin with a great explosion. There was no meteor impact darkening the sky, nor colossal volcanic eruption burying life beneath ash. The end of the world, as the giants knew it, began far more subtly. It began with a sound that at first seemed almost hopeful, the sound of trickling water. Roughly 15,000 to 12,000 years ago, something happened that we would today call climate warming, but at a pace and intensity that dwarfs anything we are currently experiencing. The cosmic cycles we described earlier shifted. The Earth tilted back toward the sun. The ice that had lain like a heavy white lid across Scandinavia and the Alps for millennia began to sweat. Streams became rivers. Rivers swelled into raging torrents. Great European rivers grew into powerful surges, carrying glacial meltwater toward the sea. At first glance, this might sound like good news. Warmth means life, plants grow better, days lengthen, winters soften. But for the highly specialized inhabitants of the mammoth steppe, this warming was no salvation. It was a catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. Because with the warmth came the rain, and with the rain, the world they knew began to disappear. We must remember what made the Ice Age giants possible in the first place: the dry cold. This dryness had created the mammoth steppe, that endless, nutrient-rich grassland stretching from Spain to Siberia. It was a harsh land, yes, but the soil was firm, and the forage was energy-dense. But as temperatures rose, atmospheric chemistry shifted. Warmer air holds more moisture. The clear, dry skies of the Ice Age gave way to clouds heavy with rain. The ground, once solid permafrost, began to soften. Picture a 6-ton mammoth, its entire anatomy built for walking across firm steppe ground, its feet like pillars made for solid earth. Now imagine that ground turning, every spring, into a bottomless swamp. The animals sank. Every step suddenly cost twice the energy. It was as though a marathon runner was forced overnight to run through rubber boots filled with deep mud. Mobility. The very key to survival for these great herds was broken, but that was only the logistical problem. The ecological problem ran far deeper. The new warmth and moisture favored a kind of plant that had played only a minor role in the dry Ice Age world: the tree. For thousands of years, Europe had been an open stage. Now the curtain began to fall. Forests spread with startling speed. Birch, pine, and later oak claimed the open pastures. What today looks to us like a beautiful German forest was, for the megafauna, a green desert. Why? Because trees and the moss growing beneath them are essentially useless to a grass-eating animal. A mammoth cannot digest pine needles. The nutrient-rich grasses and herbs of the steppe were choked out by the shadow of the trees. The buffet closed. These animals found themselves in a landscape that looked green and lush, but offered almost no usable calories. They starved with full stomachs because the new vegetation was simply too poor in nutrients, or too difficult to digest for their highly specialized systems. One particularly tragic victim of this transformation was the giant deer, Megaloceros giganteus. We have only mentioned it briefly so far, but now its story becomes a symbol of this entire collapse. This deer carried antlers spanning up to 3.6 meters across, the most magnificent status symbol of the Ice Age, perfect for impressing mates and intimidating rivals on the open plain. But in a dense birch forest, antlers like these became a death sentence. They caught on branches. The animal could not flee. It could not even turn its head freely. For a long time, scientists believed giant deer simply got physically stuck in the new forests. Today, we understand the truth was more complicated. To regrow such an enormous rack of antlers each year, the deer needed vast quantities of calcium and phosphorus, minerals drawn from the rich herbs of the open steppe. As forests advanced, these mineral-rich plants vanished. The deer developed osteoporosis. Their bones grew brittle. They could no longer grow their massive antlers properly, or the antlers collapsed under their own weight due to the lack of nutrients. Evolution had driven them into a dead end. Their greatest advantage became their greatest weakness the moment the rules of the game changed. But the changing climate had one more cruel weapon: snow. This sounds paradoxical. Why would a warmer world bring more snow? During the height of the Ice Age, the air was so cold it remained extremely dry. Snowfall was rare. What little snow fell was thin and powdery, easily swept aside. But during the transitional period, as oceans warmed, more water evaporated. In winter, this moisture fell as massive snowfall, meters of heavy, wet snow. Animals accustomed to clearing a few centimeters of light powder now faced walls of white. They simply could not push through. They could no longer reach the grass beneath. The woolly rhinoceros, with its low-hanging head and short legs, stood little chance. It became trapped, exhausted, isolated within snowfalls that simply would not stop. And then there was the water itself. Sea levels rose. Remember Doggerland, that rich grazing land connecting Britain to mainland Europe? As the ice melted, the North Sea filled within just a few generations, the blink of an eye in geological terms, and the most fertile land in Europe vanished beneath the waves. Herds were pushed onto ever smaller islands and peninsulas. Populations fragmented. Inbreeding became a serious problem. Genetic diversity, essential for adapting to new diseases, dwindled away. Speaking of disease, this new, warm, humid world brought visitors that had never had access during the Ice Age. Parasites, mosquitoes, ticks, bacteria. The megafauna had no immune defenses prepared for these new threats. A mammoth, already weakened by food scarcity and stress, became an easy target for new pathogens spreading through the warming climate. It is a bleak scene to picture. The great herds, once so vast, they darkened the horizon, splintering into small, scattered groups. They retreated toward the last remaining pockets of cold steppe, pushing further and further north, chasing the shrinking ice. But Siberia and northern Europe became a dead end. To the north waited only the Arctic Ocean. There was no escape. Some species tried to adapt. We find evidence that mammoths grew smaller during their final millennia. Dwarf forms emerged on isolated islands in the Arctic where the very last mammoths survived, even as the pyramids were already being built in Egypt. But for the great mainland populations, the change came too fast. Evolution requires time, thousands of years, to transform a grass eater into a forest dweller. Climate change did not give them that time. And here we run into a genuine scientific puzzle, one that continues to fuel heated debate. Climate change had happened before. Over the past 2.5 million years, there were dozens of ice ages and warm periods. Again and again, the ice melted. Again and again, the forests returned, and every single time before, the megafauna had survived. They retreated, held on in small refuges, and returned once the cold came back. So why not this time? Why did the end of the last ice age become a true mass extinction, rather than just another temporary retreat? Climate alone is not quite a sufficient explanation. It was the hammer that struck the ecosystem, yes, but was it also the one who pulled the trigger? When investigating a crime, you look for motive and opportunity. Climate provided the opportunity. It weakened the victims, drove them into corners, stripped away their food and their cover. But many researchers believe someone else stood in the shadows, someone who happened to be there exactly at this moment of weakness, ready to exploit it completely. We have already met this figure. He carried spears, he carried fire, and he was hungry. But was he truly capable of driving entire species into extinction? Could a handful of humans, armed only with stone tools, really have killed off millions of animals? Or is this only a modern fantasy, born from our own collective guilt? The great dying left behind an emptier world, a quieter one, where once the trumpeting of mammoths echoed across the land. Birds now sang in the branches of new forests. It was a beautiful new world, our world, but it was built upon a graveyard. We now arrive at the final accusation. Was it climate change? Or was it humanity? Or was it a deadly alliance of both? We will examine the evidence, looking at what modern computer modeling and forensic archaeology reveal about the true cause, and the answer may be more uncomfortable than we would like. We stand at a crime scene. It is global. It spans entire continents, and the bodies have lain buried for 10,000 years. It is the largest cold case in history, one that has divided paleontologists, archaeologists, and climate scientists for decades. The prime suspect sits in the dock, and it is us, our ancestors. The charge, complicity in the extinction of the megafauna. But is it really that simple? Was a Stone Age human, armed with wood and stone, truly capable of wiping out populations numbering in the millions? Or is this merely modern hubris, the belief that we were already powerful enough back then to reshape an entire planet? To answer this, we turn to a theory that shook the scientific world in the 1960s. It came from a researcher named Paul Martin, and it carries a striking name, the overkill hypothesis. Martin examined a map of the world and noticed a suspicious pattern, one almost too perfect to be coincidence. Everywhere modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived, nature fell silent shortly after. Look at Australia, humans arrive. The giant marsupials and reptiles vanish. Look at North and South America. Humans cross from Asia, spread across the continent. And within a few thousand years, entire genera of large mammals are wiped out, from the saber-toothed cat to the giant ground sloth. Martin called this the Blitzkrieg model. The logic is brutally simple. Animals in the Americas or Australia had never encountered humans before. They had no evolved fear of a small, two-legged primate. When a lion appeared, a wild horse instinctively knew to run. But when a human appeared, it did not look dangerous. It did not smell like a typical predator. It had no obvious fangs or claws. This naivety toward humans was their downfall. A hunter could simply walk up to a giant ground sloth and drive a spear into its belly before the animal even understood it was under attack. But does this hold true for Europe, for the region we now call Germany? Here, the evidence grows more complicated, because in Europe, humans, both Neanderthals and early modern humans, had lived alongside these animals for tens of thousands of years. The mammoths here were not naive. They knew very well that these two-legged creatures with fire were dangerous. They had learned to fear us, and yet they vanished all the same. Critics of the overkill hypothesis often raise a simple mathematical objection. There were too few humans. Europe's population at the end of the Ice Age was tiny. Perhaps only a few thousand people lived across the entire region that is now Germany. How could such small, scattered groups possibly kill off millions of mammoths? There were no firearms, no industry. But here we run into a flawed assumption. You do not need to kill every single individual to drive a species to extinction. You only need to break the mathematics of reproduction. The giants of the Ice Age were what biologists call K strategists. This means they invested in quality over quantity when it came to offspring. A female mammoth, much like a modern elephant, carried her calf for nearly 2 years. She typically had only one calf at a time. She invested years into raising it. That calf did not reach sexual maturity until roughly 10 to 12 years of age. This is an extraordinarily slow reproductive cycle. A rabbit population can recover quickly from losses. A mammoth population cannot. Computer simulations paint a sobering picture. If a group of hunters in a single valley killed even occasionally, say one mammoth a week for the entire group, while disproportionately targeting young animals or pregnant females, the population would collapse. Not overnight, but steadily. Birth rates simply could not keep pace with death rates. It was not a single massacre. It was death by 1,000 cuts, stretched across centuries. To any individual hunter, this decline would have been invisible. He assumed the herd would return again next year. But it returned smaller each time, until one year it did not return at all. We find traces of this hunting everywhere. At cave sites across the Swabian Alps, and at locations near the Rhine, bones bear unmistakable cut marks left by stone tools. We know humans ate mammoths. We know they drove horse herds over cliffs in France, as evidence at one famous site where tens of thousands of bones still lie at the base of the rocks, makes clear. Humans were highly efficient super predators. They did not kill only when hungry. They killed in surplus. They planned ahead. But was humanity solely responsible? Probably not. The most current answer to the question of who killed the giants seems to be it was a deadly alliance, a perfect storm. Picture the mammoth as a boxer, already standing in the 12th round. Climate change, the shrinking steppe, the deep snow, the advancing forests was the opponent that wore him down. The mammoth staggered. It was weakened. Its habitat shrank. Its herds grew isolated. It stood on the verge of being knocked out, but might have recovered, had it simply been left alone. But precisely in this moment of weakness, humanity stepped into the ring and delivered the final blow. We did not hunt these animals at the height of their power. We hunted them when they were already on the ground. We occupied the watering holes during drought. We killed the last fertile females after a brutal winter had already thinned the herd. We were the accelerant thrown onto a house already burning. Without humans, mammoths and rhinoceroses might have retreated north and survived there, until the climate turned cold again. Without climate change, these massive populations might have withstood human hunting pressure indefinitely. But together, the combination proved impossible to survive. There is one more often overlooked factor: the domino effect. Humans did not only kill directly with the spear, they killed indirectly with fire. Pollen analysis from sediment cores in German lake beds shows that charcoal particles increased sharply with the arrival of humans. We burned landscapes deliberately to ease hunting or to encourage fresh grass growth. We actively reshaped habitats, and once the great landscape architects, like the mammoth, disappeared, the landscape changed yet again. Without giants trampling down young trees, forests grew denser still, which in turn stripped remaining steppe dwellers, like the woolly rhinoceros, of what little habitat remained. It was a chain reaction. We pulled one stone from the foundation, and the entire cathedral of the Ice Age came crashing down. What remained was an impoverished world. Europe lost the vast majority of its large animal life within a remarkably short span of time. The survivors were the generalists: red deer, wild boar, roe deer, wolves, brown bears, animals capable of hiding within forests, animals not dependent on open steppe, animals that reproduced quickly enough to weather the storm. The specialists, the giants, the icons, were reduced to dust and bone. It is an uncomfortable truth. We tend to romanticize our ancestors as living in perfect harmony with nature, but the evidence suggests humans have always been a disruptive force. The moment we possessed the technology to do so, we reshaped our environment according to our needs and drove competitors or prey to the very edge of collapse. The extinction of the megafauna was humanity's first truly global intervention into Earth's ecosystem. We were the asteroid. Today, 12,000 years later, we stand once again at a turning point. The giants are gone, surviving now only as myths and museum exhibits. But in recent years, something has begun to stir. In laboratories around the world, something is happening. We have found the bones. We have discovered teeth preserved in permafrost, still containing traces of blood. We have sequenced the mammoth genome, and suddenly a question arises that is no longer pure science fiction, but tangible, ethically explosive science. If we were the ones who destroyed them, do we now carry the duty, or at least the right, to bring them back? Can we turn back the clock of time itself? Is the death of a species truly final? The technology exists. The plans sit ready on the table. What sounds like the plot of a science fiction film is, for some researchers, the next great frontier. Todd is the only certainty we humans have ever truly possessed. When the last heart of a species stops beating, when its final breath fades away, a light goes out that the universe can never relight. That, at least, has been the law governing life on this planet since its very beginning. Death is a one-way street, or is it? We no longer stand in the past. We are no longer knee-deep in the mud of the mammoth steppe, and we are no longer freezing within some cave in the Swabian Alps. We find ourselves now in a sterile, brightly lit laboratory. It does not smell of wet fur and musk, but of disinfectant and ozone. Here, beneath the lens of a high-powered microscope, a drama is unfolding as monumental as the impact of an asteroid. Except this one happens in complete silence. We are looking at a single cell, And within that cell, something begins to pulse that, by all rights, should not exist anymore. Something extinct for 4,000 years. Welcome to the age of de-extinction. What only a few decades ago belonged purely to science fiction is today a tangible, funded, and scientifically plausible reality. The question is no longer truly whether we can bring the mammoth back. The question now is when, and more importantly, whether we should. But how is this even possible? Dinosaurs are lost forever, their DNA long since broken down to nothing. But the giants of the Ice Age left us a gift, the permafrost, nature's ultimate deep freeze. In Siberia and parts of Canada, warming temperatures are now thawing carcasses so well preserved they almost look asleep. When researchers in remote Siberia discovered the body of a female mammoth some years ago, dark, thick blood actually flowed from the tissue when they cut into it. Within that blood, within the bones and teeth, lies the blueprint of the giant, its DNA. It is, admittedly, broken, fragmented across the millennia, like a book that has been run through a shredder. But we have a template to help reassemble the puzzle. The Asian elephant is the mammoth's closest living relative. They share roughly 99.6% of their genome, a closer match than between humans and chimpanzees. Scientists in the United States, led by visionaries like geneticist George Church, are now using revolutionary genetic tools. Imagine something like a word processor for life itself. They take the DNA of an Asian elephant and, at key locations, insert mammoth genes in their place. Genes for long fur, genes for thick fat layers, genes for hemoglobin, capable of carrying oxygen even in extreme cold. The goal is not a perfect clone in the classical sense. We will likely never recreate a flawless, original mammoth. What grows instead in artificial wombs within these laboratories is a hybrid, an elephant modified for the cold, a biological echo of the past. But for the ecosystem, genetic purity hardly matters. What matters is simply, does it behave like a mammoth? Why pursue this at all? Is it pure hubris, a playground for eccentric billionaires? Or is there something deeper at work here? The answer leads us back to a remote research site in Siberia called Pleistocene Park, where a Russian scientist and his son are running an experiment that could, quite literally, help save the world. Their theory is as simple as it is brilliant. Mammoths were not merely residents of the steppe. They were its guardians. When the giants disappeared, trees and moss moved in. The ground darkened, absorbing the sun's warmth. In winter, snow settled like an insulating blanket over the soil, trapping the Earth's own heat beneath it. As a result, the permafrost began to thaw, and within that permafrost lie staggering quantities of methane and carbon dioxide, twice as much as currently exists in our entire atmosphere. If this ground continues to thaw, climate change may become unstoppable. This is where the mammoth comes back into the picture. A herd of mammoths acts almost like a bulldozer. In winter, their weight compacts the snow, destroying its insulating effect, allowing the cold air to penetrate deep into the ground and refreeze it. In summer, they tear down young trees and encourage the growth of bright grasses that reflect sunlight back into space. The vision is breathtaking. We bring the mammoths back, not for zoos, but as ecological engineers. Thousands of them roaming across the tundra of Canada, Alaska, and Russia, transforming the North back into grassland, and in doing so, diffusing the ticking time bomb buried within the permafrost. It would be an attempt at restitution. We destroyed them, and in doing so, helped destabilize the climate. Now we bring them back to help stabilize it once again. It would be one of history's great ironies if the very animal we drove to extinction ended up saving us from ourselves. But this vision carries a darker side as well, one we cannot ignore: the ethical question. Picture the first mammoth calf that might be born within the next few years. It opens its eyes into a world of glass and steel. It searches for its mother, but finds only an elephant cow, who may reject it entirely, sensing it is somehow wrong, or worse, only machines. Mammoths were deeply social creatures. They learned from their elders. Who teaches the first new mammoth how to be a mammoth? Is it cruel to bring a creature into a world utterly foreign to it? Are we condemning this being to a life of isolation, a scientific curiosity living entirely alone? Critics, including many within the scientific community, warn of a Frankenstein scenario. Do we have the right to design living creatures like products? And what happens if they escape, carry unknown diseases, or disrupt ecosystems that have functioned without them for over 100,000 years? We stand at a crossroads. On one side lies the path of hope, of technological redemption, of restoring a paradise we once lost. On the other lies the path of caution, of humility before the finality of death. Perhaps, one day, we will see footage from Siberia. A herd of shaggy giants moving through the snow, steam rising from their breath, the deep rumble of their calls, echoing once more across the frozen air. After thousands of years of silence, an image of ancient power brought to life through futuristic science. Our journey through time ends here, but the story of the Earth continues. We have seen how the Ice Age transformed animals into giants through the unforgiving laws of thermodynamics. We have seen how they ruled, how they fought, how they adapted. We have seen how the great cosmic clockwork of the Milankovitch cycles sealed their fate, and how our own ancestors delivered the final blow. The story of the megafauna is not some closed chapter in a dusty old book. It is a mirror. It shows us just how fragile dominance truly is. The mammoth surely never imagined its reign would end. We rarely imagine that of ourselves either. But the lesson of the Ice Age is clear. No one rules forever. The world keeps changing. Ice comes and ice goes. Species rise, species fall. We are the first living beings to truly understand this process, and the first with the power to influence it. We can destroy as we did 12,000 years ago. But we can also preserve and perhaps even heal. The next time you step outside on a cold winter morning and watch your breath rise as a pale cloud in the air, think of the giants. They are not truly gone. They live on in the earth beneath us, in the genes of elephants, and in our imagination. And perhaps, just perhaps, one day soon, they may stand before our eyes once more. Thank you for joining us on this journey through millions of years of cold, struggle, and evolution here on Sumner's documentary. Rest well, and we will see you on the next expedition into the deep past.